Before we get started, there will be spoilers for the 1000-year Blood War arc of Bleach in the video to follow. When it comes to Bleach, what makes a broken ability? Bleach is of course absolutely full of incredible, creative, and utterly powerful abilities, but what makes one truly broken? At least in my mind, a broken ability is one that simply isn't balanced in any way. It isn't fair. It's extraordinarily powerful, yes, but there is no cost to using it, and no real way to counter it either, organically at least, outside of extremely specific and often contrived means. It's when the odds are firmly stacked in the ability's favour, to the point where, like I said, it just isn't fair. At least, in my opinion, that's what constitutes a truly broken ability as opposed to one that's just really strong. Now, about 3 years ago or so, I ranked what I thought were the 10 most broken abilities in Bleach, but truthfully, looking back at that video, I'm not so convinced by the list today. It's not so much that I don't think those abilities deserve to be on there, it's just the scope should be so much greater. It's a nearly impossible ranking to get right as well, with almost limitless permutations, factors, and qualities to consider, but more importantly, looking back on it, I realise just how many deserving abilities were left out. So today I want to provide a more all-encompassing update, a better look at the pinnacle of power, and the sheer absurdity of some of Bleach's absolute best. And yes, I've tried my best to single out actual abilities, rather than using blanket powers and terms like so-and-so's bankai and calling it a day. So in no particular order, that's right, we're not going to be ranking these today. Like I said, it's a nearly impossible list. These are 25 or so of the most broken abilities in Bleach, powers in another class of their own. Remember guys to hit subscribe down below if you enjoyed today's video. It is quick and easy to do, and it massively helps support the channel, so I do greatly appreciate it. And if you haven't done already, consider checking out my other channel, Mr. Tomo Talks Games, for discussions on gaming, the games industry, all of that sort of thing. If you are passionate about games, if you enjoy them as much as I do, consider going over there if you haven't done already, and dropping a subscribe if you want to see more from that channel as well. Again, your support is greatly appreciated. I really do appreciate the incredible turnout on the latest video I put over there. So yeah, if you haven't done already, consider checking it out, and your support does mean the absolute world. Let's kickstart the list with a famous one that should hopefully prove right out of the gate that these aren't in any order. Aizen's Kyoka Suigetsu, more specifically, its power of Kanzen Saimin, or absolute hypnosis. Aizen's Shikai controls all 5 senses, creating perfect illusions that are practically impossible to notice. Aizen famously uses his sword to project the image of his own corpse, which was later handled and inspected even by the likes of Urahara, and nothing suspicious or incriminating was detected about it. 100 years earlier, Aizen had someone completely different take his place as Shinji's vice captain, and they followed the captain around for an entire month without Shinji realizing. The real kicker is that in order to trap people under his spell, they only need to see the release of Aizen's Zanpakuto once. After that, his victims, however many of them there are, will be under his hypnosis forevermore, meaning that to them, their entire reality at any time could be an illusion of Aizen's making. Up next, we have the ultimate ability of Gin's Bankai Kamishini no Yari, which was so strong it outright killed a transcendent Aizen with ease. While Gin puts on quite the display with his Bankai, demonstrating both the rapid speed and city-wide scope of his blade, his Bankai's true power is much more sinister and effective. Upon striking a target with his sword, Gin is able to leave a small piece of his blade within their body as it turns to ash for a brief moment. After that, the fragment left behind breaks down and releases a deadly toxin that completely dissolves the victim's body from the inside out. As we see, when Gin tries to assassinate Aizen, Aizen's entire form splits open as a result of the poison, and considering Aizen's status as a transcendent being at this point in the story, we can safely assume that this poison would work on just about anyone. Considering the speed at which Gin is able to blitz his opponent with his bankai, Kamishini no Yari's ultimate power is absolutely terrifying. This next one is similar to Gin's bankai, albeit perhaps not quite as efficient. But then, on the flip side, Soi Fon needs only to release her Shikai, Suzumebachi, to gain access to its special power of Nigeki Kesatsu. By stabbing her target twice in the same spot, Soi Fon can instantly kill her enemy, and it seems to be guaranteed except for when her power is overridden by a much greater one. But as we see when she effectively removes Gyovega from existence, it does the job it says it will. And if that wasn't powerful enough, Soi Fon doesn't need to stab the same spot on the victim's exterior. Against Gyovega, she stabbed his lung in the same place internally, resulting in his death. When battling Yoruichi, Soi Fon reveals that while the homunca marks generated by Suzumebachi used to expire after a time, now they remain on her opponent for as long as she wants them to, meaning it only takes a single strike to permanently mark someone for death. Moving way ahead into the story now, up next we have Toshiro Hitsugaya's completed bankai, more specifically, its ability to freeze the functions of anything it touches. This is a completely ridiculous power that is kind of just hand-waved away due to the messy nature of the battle against Gerard, but really this has to be one of the craziest abilities in Bleach. But first, a bit of context. Gerard Valkyrie wields a sword called Hoffnung, which acts as an extension of his own power, the Miracle, and stay tuned for that. Hoffnung represents the hope of the masses, and when it's damaged, that damage is reflected back upon the attacker who chipped the blade. However, when Hitsugaya casually carves the sword in two, freezing it entirely, nothing happens. Hitsugaya himself explains that by freezing the blade, he's stopped it from functioning, and even Gerard's hope has ceased to work. So, does this mean that in this form, Hitsugaya can cancel out all abilities by freezing them or the weapons from which they are produced? Another bankai with a totally broken ability is, well, my favourite bankai in the series, Kisuke Urahara's Kanon Biraki Benehime Aratame, and its central singular power to restructure anything it touches. Again, like most of these busted abilities, there is no cost to doing this whatsoever. Kisuke can freely rewrite the very fabric of reality around himself, his enemies, or the space surrounding them, thanks to his bankai. When this bankai is activated, its ability immediately comes into play. Benehime herself can restructure anything she physically touches, restoring Kisuke's destroyed eyes, but it also radiates out an invisible aura that affects anyone within the vicinity. Askin's arm was split open before his very eyes, while Kisuke restructured his own arm on the fly to massively enhance his physical capabilities. Again, there seems to be no limitations to what this bankai can restructure or how, in what manner, and therefore what it can modify. Kisuke also uses the bankai to open a portal for Grimmjow to move through, restructuring the landscape to create a pathway for the Espada to use, and this is presumably done while the bankai is in use against Askin, implying an enormous range, maybe even wider than Askin first surmised. Okay, so this one is a little tougher, but I feel like it deserves to be on here. Kyoraku's bankai, Katenkyo Kot's Karamatsu Shinju, is totally busted, but it doesn't really have one specific broken ability, as all of its 4 acts flow into each other as part of the story it's trying to tell. And considering the acts of this bankai were able to affect even the intangible Lille Barrow, well, they're all pretty insane. But I guess if I have to pick one of the acts listed here, well, it would have to be the final act, where as Kyoraku reaches the end of his tale, he wraps a white thread of regret around the throat of his enemy before decapitating them and killing them instantly. I've chosen this act because by this point in the bankai, it seems as though death is inevitable, whereas it seems to be still possible, albeit extremely difficult, to escape the bankai prior to this. Still, this is a really tough one, and I'd be interested to see what you think in the comments. Up next we have another that is similar in style to Kyoraku's bankai, making it difficult for me to pin down exactly which ability I want to address. Yamamoto's bankai Zanka no Tachi is clearly one of the most powerful collections of monstrous abilities in the series, giving us one of the greatest bankai ever seen in Bleach, as the head captain is garbed in the fury of the sun itself, all the while casually erasing things from existence with his sword and conjuring an army of the dead. Much like Kyoraku's bankai before it, my previous video on the subject simply listed Zanka no Tachi, but like I said, these days I have a harder time of squaring that away as a simple ability. It doesn't seem particularly fair to do so. For me then, I think what I'm settling on, what's truly broken about this bankai, is the ability Zanka no Tachi West, which sees Yamamoto cloaked in a flaming Reiatsu so powerful and so immense that it erases anything that touches it. Yes, Zanka no Tachi East also annihilates things from existence, but it's more predictable, and only focused upon the edge of the blade. But thanks to West, Yamamoto himself is nigh untouchable, to the point where I have literally no idea how someone would reach him under normal circumstances. He himself claims to be wrapped in the power of the sun, and don't forget, this cloak of flame is actually invisible most of the time. Yamamoto himself simply chose to reveal it. Now, ordinarily, I would have included Senjumaru's bankai Shatatsu Karagara Shigarami no Suji here because it is one of the craziest in the entire series, but it is an anime-only edition, and we are trying to stick rigidly to the manga here. Otherwise, I'd be including the light novels, and this would really just go completely off the wall. But we can't talk about the Zero Division without mentioning Ichibei Hyosebe and his Zanpakuto Ichimonji, which easily makes it onto the list. Specifically, we are talking about Ichimonji's Shikai, activated with the command Paint It Black, and of course his Shikai only has the one ability. In this form, Ichimonji's brush head becomes a blade, and when swung, the blade splashes black ink all over the battlefield. Anything that's covered in the black ink has its name completely erased, and all of its power goes with it. Again, this is one of those abilities that is shockingly easy to get an insane amount of value out of. Ichibei doesn't need to do anything, save for splash ink on his target, and they are completely powerless as a result. Not only that, but Ichibei can blot out the name of anything he strikes with his ink. In his battle with Yhwach, we see him coating Yhwach's main tools in black, his sword and his Quincy cross, rendering them little more than useless objects. And of course, Ichimonji's Shikai then opens the gate for Ichimonji's bankai to come into play. So I've got one more Shinigami to talk about on this list. Like I said, I would have included Senjumaru here, and I was considering including Izuru Kira's Wabisuke on the list as well, as it is truly busted in regards to its actual ability. However, I decided to leave it out in favour of other powers, simply due to its very limited range. The power to double the weight of anything it touches is crazy, but it doesn't have any real versatility. Izuru has to get in close, and he has to land his hit for it to work, which is true for many of the abilities on this list, like Ichibei's Ink or Gin's Bankai for instance, but for those and many others, they have ways of making that considerably easier for themselves. Wabisuke is literally just a sword, so instead I went for one that feels like a more deserving answer, one that doesn't seem to really have any downsides whatsoever, the ability of Yumichika's true Shikai, Rurouni Kujaku. In this form, Yumichika's Shikai explodes into an array of glowing vines, which instantly latch onto and wrap around his target. These vines then sap his target of their Reryoku, their life force essentially, even turning it into flowers for Yumichika himself to consume. What's truly crazy about this power is that we've seen evidence of Yumichika using it on enemies who are both stronger than him. Both Charlotte and especially Hisagi are more powerful than Yumichika, but he instantly defeats them both as soon as he unveils his true ability. Okay, moving away from the Shinigami now, and we have Orihime's Shun Rika. Awakened by the Hogyoku, which answered the call of Orihime's powerlessness, Orihime's Shun Rika is really a power unlike any other in Bleach. By conjuring the 6 spirits that reside within her hairpins, Orihime can perform all manner of incredible feats, from rejecting phenomena entirely in order to completely heal someone's wounds and even restore their lost limbs with ease, to manifesting an unstoppable shield that, as Orihime's powers grow in strength, can eventually block even the series' most incredible cataclysmic attacks. Orihime doesn't have to give up anything in order to pull off these miracles, though the effectiveness of her abilities has fluctuated throughout the series. For example, she's able to essentially resurrect Menoli from the dead, but never seems to achieve quite that level of healing again. And of course, there's the fact that Shun Rika, that's not really an ability, it's a moveset, a power set, that then has a bunch of abilities that branch off of it. And so for the purpose of this video, I'm going to say that the most broken of Shun Rika's techniques is Soten Kishin, the healing technique, because that is by far the one that seems to veer mostly into the territory of the divine. The fact that she can just bring back limbs immediately, with no cost, no real expenditure of strength or effort, is absolute insanity. Another fullbring that makes the list is Yukio's Invaders Must Die. Now again, to be honest, the fullbrings are a little tricky. It kind of feels like most of them play completely by their own rules. I was considering placing Dollhouse on the list too, but I don't know, it kind of feels like Invaders Must Die, but just with less granular control over each individual aspect. Using his console, Yukio can save targets into his digital reality and then load them into a separate dimension which he then controls via his device. Yukio has complete control over this dimension, which is the Fullbringer's primary ability, and as part of this control, Yukio does what I think is by far his most broken feat. He creates a box to imprison Orihime in, while at the same time totally shutting out her power. Because Yukio's power is based on a game world, it runs on logic and hard and fast rules. By sealing Orihime in a box with this particular symbol on it, it seems as though she has no choice but to comply. Her powers, which, as I literally just said, are themselves godlike, simply don't work within this space, and there's nothing she can do about it. Alright, moving on to some Arrancar now, and first up is Aaroniero's Glottoneria, which allows the Espada to not only devour a hollow, but also receive all of its abilities and Reiatsu. This is absolutely crazy, and makes Aaroniero potentially one of the most dangerous hollows in existence, were he capable of a little more himself. This is one of those powers that simply isn't used to its fullest potential in the manga at all. Although Aaroniero claims to have devoured over 30,000 hollows and therefore assimilated their individual powers and abilities, clearly none of them had any abilities to write home about, as he only uses the power of metastasia above all else. But as far as we know, Aaroniero receives the strength and individual abilities of every single hollow he eats, and again, as far as we know, keeps them forever, so he should have amassed an army of distinct powers. For example, if Aaroniero were to devour Shrieker and Grand Fisher, he would then gain their ability, Shrieker's power to create bombs and Grand Fisher's lure, to name a pair, as well as their Reiatsu on top of that, and presumably this extends to more powerful Arrancar as well. If Aaroniero were to devour Zamari, he would gain the ability to use Amor, as well as all of Zamari's Reryoku on top of that. Aaroniero is able to evolve endlessly as a result of this ability, and all that seems to hold him back is the fact that it would appear he is a fairly weak Gillian at his core, but I mean, what is stopping him from potentially devouring the Espada and gaining not only their abilities, but their actual raw strength, their Reryoku too? Well, aside from them killing him if he tried to, that is. Another Espada harbouring a ridiculous power is Szayelaporro Granz, whose ultimate ability is Gabriel, a power designed to elevate him into the perfect being. Thanks to Gabriel, Szayelaporro can resurrect himself after death, so long as he has a host body from which he can be born back into the world. By ensnaring Nemu with a tentacle, Szayelaporro is able to later regrow his body from inside of her, draining her of her life in order to restore himself completely, and in a matter of seconds at that. Again, what makes this such a broken power isn't necessarily just the fact that it is resurrection, but it's the fact that there are simply no downsides for Szayelaporro to use it. It's not like he is reborn into a weaker, more vulnerable, childlike state or something like that. He literally reappears in his resurrection exactly as he was at the moment of his death. Obviously, in this particular instance, Szayelaporro's rebirth results in his downfall, but not everyone is up against Mairi after all. And next on the list is one that was present in the previous video, and of course that's Baraggan's Respirar. Maybe one of the more famous abilities of the series, Respirar is the sole ability of Baraggan's Resurrection Arrogante, and is nice and straightforward. This skeletal tyrant can emit a breath of death from himself, whether that's from his mouth, unleashed via outstretching his hand, or just surrounding his body as a constant miasma, and this ominous purple smoke rapidly rots everything it touches, speeding up the aging process until there is absolutely nothing left. Simply by touching Soi Fon's arm, Respirar decays her flesh to the bone in a matter of seconds, and she was forced to remove her arm entirely, lest her entire body then be reduced to dust. The same is true of absolutely everything Respirar touches. All things age, and as Baraggan says, nothing lasts forever, meaning everything is subject to his absolute power. As the cherry on top, Respirar is capable of moving fast enough to catch Soi Fon of all characters, making escape from this sea of decay virtually impossible. Up next we have a power that I feel often goes a little overlooked when people talk about the craziest, strongest abilities in Bleach, and that's the ultimate ability of Starrk's Resurrection Los Lobos, his wolf army. And I get it, as Starrk is a purposefully low-key character, but this power is on another level entirely, and it only works because Starrk is who he is. His soul is so exorbitantly strong that it can be freely ripped and split apart with minimal effort, creating an entire, tangible pack of wolves that will then fight on the Espada's behalf, because they are him. So basically what we have here is a character who can continuously generate these essentially unkillable warheads by using his own soul, something we never really see in the series, and then can just sit back and watch as this seemingly never-ending army devastates the enemy. The individual wolves themselves aren't that powerful. Their point-blank explosions do a bit of damage to the Vizard captains, but it's the sheer number of them that Starrk is able to create. It seems like endless ammo that's overwhelming. It's the sheer fact that the wolves can't easily be killed, and it's the sheer fact that Starrk himself can just seemingly release this power from his own body, again, without even breaking a sweat. Okay, this next one is interesting. Yammy Largo's era has only one central ability, and as I always say, those are almost universally the most powerful. While Yammy himself is hugely disappointing as the Zero Espada, there's also no denying that Era's ability, which is very simple, is kind of broken. Era's ability is this: the angrier Yammy becomes, the stronger he becomes, and this even results in a totally new transformation that evolves Yammy's resurrection completely. In many ways, and I've said this before, Era feels like a proto-Shrift to me in terms of design. It's got that weird blanket simplicity to it that makes it extremely powerful and difficult to quantify, where its limits are hard to identify. It's very similar in that way to something like the Superstar. These buffs and evolutions are free and very easy to achieve, and how far exactly can they go? Those are exactly the kinds of questions you ask when confronted with a busted ability like this. It's not the ability's fault that Yammy couldn't live up to it. And well, speaking of the superstar, here it is. Our first shrift, and yes, it is busted. It works in a very similar manner, like I said, to Yammy's era. The more cheers Mask Demasculine receives from his fan James, the more powerful he becomes. Again, it's very abstract and difficult to quantify, but all we can glean from the way it's used in the manga is that Mask does become significantly more powerful, very quickly, very easily, with limited effort on his part. Not only that, but James himself simply can't be killed, meaning the superstar can't be easily circumvented. Similarly to Yammy's era, powering up enough with the superstar transforms Mask Demasculine as well, and again it's hard to know exactly where the limits are with this ability. A lot of people have compared the superstar to the miracle, and I get and agree with that assessment, but it is also a lot more similar to era than people realise. Up next we have another pretty simple power, Quilge's the Jail, which again seems to have virtually no limits to what it can achieve. By firing a particular arrow from his saber, Quilge can imprison a target within a spherical jail made of reishi, and then said target simply cannot escape. Again, this kind of reminds me of Yukio's ability that we spoke about earlier. It seems as though the jail operates on a set of immovable rules, and well, that is that. Ichigo is demonstrably more powerful than Quilge at this point in the story, and yet he is totally incapable of escaping the cage because, well, that's the rules. Quilge's the Jail was specifically designed to hold their enemies, meaning it can imprison everyone who isn't a Quincy. And that is the loophole. That is literally the only reason Ichigo manages to escape in the end. And not only that, but the jail even persists after Quilge dies, which seems frankly insane to me, as even absolutely terrifying abilities like Book of the End have that as a means of escape. Haschwalth's shrift, The Balance, allows him to redistribute misfortune to those that have experienced good fortune, essentially making him the ultimate counter to just about any ability in the series. The extent of this ability is again seemingly limitless. Haschwalth attempts to kill Kangdu by cutting him in half, but Kangdu uses his own power of the iron, which, in case you're wondering, is not going to be making it onto this list, to shield himself. Considering this to be good fortune, Haschwalth's power of the balance takes that good fortune and redistributes it as misfortune upon Kangdu, making him susceptible to Haschwalth's blade, allowing the Grand Master to carve through his metal defences in a single hit. In the anime, we are treated to a new, fascinating example, one that doesn't actually involve Haschwalth himself, showing just how truly insane this power is. When Yhwach leaves the Zero Division to face Ichibei, that is considered good fortune for the remainder of the Zero Division, as they won't have to fight the Quincy King anymore. Haschwalth takes that accumulated good fortune within his sphere of influence and redirects it as misfortune towards the cage of life surrounding them all, breaking it in two with ease. The Balance is one of the series' weirdest and most abstract powers, one that, as with many on the list, seems to have no limits at all. Of course, we can't talk about the balance being broken without also talking about Uryu Ishida's shrift, The Antithesis, which is also completely insane. Uryu can choose two targets and reverse absolutely everything that has happened between them. And again, there doesn't seem to be, and I keep saying this, any limits to what that actually means. It doesn't matter what has happened between said two targets, they will be reversed. For example, Uryu reverses the positions of Yhwach and a button in order to help the king escape Hikifune's cage of life, and reverses the positions of both himself and Senjumaru, to not only escape her bankai, but actually trap her within it, allowing him to kill her with ease. In his battle with Haschwalth, Uryu reverses their wounds, though this is then reversed again by Haschwalth's own shrift, so again, what are the limits here, if any? If there's nothing Uryu couldn't swap, If he chose two targets, one of whom was living, one of whom was dead, would their status be instantly reversed? Could he kill and resurrect in that fashion? It's kind of crazy to even think about. Gerard's The Miracle is a fittingly broken power for the vessel of the heart of the Soul King. Technically not a shrift, as it's an ability Gerard always possessed rather than one that was granted to him by Yhwach. The Miracle allows Gerard to do a number of things, but in essence it all comes down to the idea of allowing Gerard to achieve the impossible in the face of impossible odds. For example, when Gerard battles the entire force of the Gotei 13, his power kicked in and made him gigantic, replacing his entire body with his god size when it became clear that there was no way he was going to win, and when they were able to inflict enormous amounts of damage upon him as a result. Then, when he was trying to find the Vizard because locating such tiny people would now be an impossible task for a giant like him, he was able to find them immediately and flush them out of hiding. Gerard's form represents the fears of the people, and so when he's injured, his body is restored bigger and stronger than before, and that extends to him being killed as well. Gerard is killed a total of 3 times during his battle with the Gotei 13, and each time he resurrects even stronger and larger than he was previously, seemingly completely unable to die. And again, if we had to break the Miracle up into different abilities, though I do kind of consider the Shrift as a whole to be an ability, as that's kind of how they work, but the resurrection aspect is clearly what is truly busted about Gerard. Outside of Aizen and the Hogyoku, I mean, we've never seen anything like this, really. Lille's The X-Axis starts out as a powerful but relatively straightforward power, no pun intended, allowing him to completely erase anything between the barrel of his gun and his intended target. But things only get crazier from there on out. After being forced to open his tattooed eye 3 times in one battle, Lille is then allowed to keep his eyes open for the duration of the fight, and by doing so activates the true power of the X-Axis. Now, Lille becomes completely intangible. As his bullets pass through the bodies of his opponents, so too do their weapons pass through him. And now absolutely nothing can harm him. Physical weapons, Kido, you name it. Even in the unlikely event that something powerful enough does break through and wound him, such as Kyoraku's bankai ensnaring him in its power and cutting the sternritter's head off, Lille simply regenerates, transforming even further. Okay, so at the start of this video, I said that these abilities would be listed in no particular order. And that was true, until now. As far as I'm concerned, these are the 3 most broken abilities in Bleach, and I've ranked them as such. But of course, if you disagree, let me know your thoughts down below. So, in 3rd place, we have Tsukishima's Fullbring, Book of the End, one of the most terrifying abilities in the series. Tsukishima's Fullbring takes the form of a bookmark, and by cutting something, he can insert himself into the target's past as, well, anything or anyone he chooses. We have a few examples of this, of course. Tsukishima inserts himself into the pasts of Ichigo's friends as a close friend or even a relative of theirs, creating a totally fabricated existence for himself that to them is very real, even though they've never met him before. What's crazy though, is that to them, at least until Tsukishima dies and his power thankfully wears off, this is real life now. It's not some alternate timeline. To them, Tsukishima was actually there all along. Not only that, but Tsukishima is capable of altering his presence and its impact more and more, changing and rewriting the story to suit his needs. Tsukishima inserts himself into Byakuya's past as his mentor, the one who taught him everything, but when Byakuya defeats him, Tsukishima tries to change the narrative, adapting his presence on the fly to be one who saved Byakuya's life, something Byakuya has no choice but to acknowledge as truth in the moment. Then there's the utterly absurd fact that Tsukishima can cut, say, the ground beneath him, and insert himself into that location's history, even if, as we see, that location has only existed for a few minutes. From there, Tsukishima can modify the location, creating and incorporating traps into the area, changing the past to affect the present with seemingly limitless capabilities, going way beyond what he should even realistically be able to achieve as a human. I mean, you only have to think about it for a moment. Does this mean Tsukishima could have cut Varvelt, for example, when he arrived, and made himself a presence in Varvelt's past to the point where he could have implemented something that would have just destroyed it, say a self-destruct device? Because we've clearly seen, as when he, in real time, cuts the ground in his battle with Byakuya, he's able to then add traps that clearly weren't there beforehand, despite him in that moment not having anything on him that would allow him to create traps. So he can clearly manifest things by having an effect on that location's past. So surely he could have cut the ground of Varvelt and added some self-destruct device that wasn't there originally. That's the thing, Tsukishima doesn't need to be able to accomplish these feats in reality. Book of the End will just do it for him. Against Byakuya, Tsukishima grows in strength and skill to match the captain upon cutting him, as Book of the End adapts him to help make the lie a reality, to make it so that Tsukishima could have feasibly been Byakuya's mentor in the past. It's a totally broken power. You could argue it has the same limitations as the aforementioned Wabisuke, in that Tsukishima needs to cut his target for it to work, but, well, not really, considering he can just cut the very ground beneath his feet and get limitless value out of that one action. Then, of course, in second place, there's Gremmy's The Visionary, a power so completely busted that Kubo had to give it to a character totally incapable of making the most of it. Because let's face it, Gremmy's ability of turning imagination into reality is the truest form of something being broken. There is no real cost whatsoever, and although some weaknesses are introduced later on, really what we are looking at here is an ability that can do just about anything. If Gremmy can imagine it, it will happen, to the point of conjuring a meteor that has the potential to completely wipe out the entire Serete, to ripping open the very fabric of space itself and introducing a vacuum of space into the battlefield, or of course perhaps Gremmy's greatest feat, creating life. Creating life that is utterly separate from himself. I mean, imagine that. You are given this shrift, the ability of the Visionary, and from that power you have the power to create life? I mean, that seems primed to cause all manner of problems, if you ask me. From this ability of the Visionary, Gwenael is born, Shaz Domino is born. These are just things that Gremmy can do, and he can also imagine them dead immediately, as we see with Gwenael too. Now, the way the Visionary is handled, you could say it's contrived, but I actually thought it was quite clever that Gremmy is this ultra-sheltered kid who was imprisoned for basically his entire life, and the moment he is let loose on the battlefield, he doesn't really know what to do. He can use his power, but it's mostly in a superfluous and cursory way. You know, if he actually had the bloodlust that came with being a seasoned veteran of battle, an actual warrior, maybe he would have just imagined Kenpachi dead instantly, because realistically, there is no way the Visionary should lose any battle. The power to make imagination reality is almost the most broken and powerful thing in all of Bleach, aside from one more ability, which of course is yet to come. I mean, in my mind, there's really no question that this is number 2. Of course, it is held back massively by its user. But this ability in the hands of almost anyone else would be world-breaking. You could imagine essentially anything, and it will happen. Guaranteed. Now, like I said, some weaknesses are introduced. If Gremmy kind of loses his concentration a little bit, the effects of that imaginary power, the effects of the Visionary will disappear, as seen with Yachiru's bones being made into cookies and then returning to normal a little bit later on when Gremmy has to focus his efforts elsewhere. But I mean, it's not really enough. It's not really enough. In the grand scheme of things, I mean, it would have been really cool to see Gremmy truly get the chance to let loose. He does start to go a little crazier later on. Him creating essentially clones of himself, although they aren't clones, really, they are actual sentient separate versions of him. I mean, it's such a crazy concept in the world of Bleach to even consider. In my opinion, the Visionary more than deserves its place as number 2 on this list. Turning imagination into reality. I mean, it was crazy when it was first revealed in the manga, and it's still crazy today. But really, I think you knew from the moment you clicked on this video that there was only going to be one answer taking the top spot. And of course, that is Yhwach's ability of the Almighty, which to this day is the single most broken power in Bleach. And yeah, again, I guess it makes sense. You know, this guy is the son of the Soul King. He is the final villain of the series, and he becomes the new Soul King in the wake of his father's death. So it makes sense that he would have this truly godly power, this divine capability, but the Almighty is so stupid and so busted that I can't help but wish maybe Kubo had taken a different direction with this character to some degree, because it is an ability that simply by inventing it, you have written yourself into a corner. Yhwach has to do silly things like simply decide not to use his power for an arbitrary reason, because with it, it's impossible to win, essentially. The still silver arrow, which I don't actually mind, to be honest. I think as a Deus Ex Machina, it's almost as good as it could possibly be, but it had to be invented to defeat this ability. And even then, in the manga alone, this may be explained in the anime, but in the manga alone, there's still no explanation given for how Yhwach didn't see the arrow coming. But so yeah, the Almighty, it allows Yhwach to see into the future, it allows him to see all futures, and he can see as far basically into the future as is possible. But not only that, he can alter the future as well, which is the absolute pinnacle of broken powers. It means that no matter what anyone tries to do, it means no matter how they may try to oppose this God King, Yhwach can not only see it coming, but he can alter them freely in the future. He can alter the outcome in the future before they even have any idea of what's happening. And that is why this comfortably sits at number 1, in my opinion, because no matter what any of these powers down below may try to do, Yhwach sees it all and can rewrite the scenario to his favour. Gremmy, in second place with the Visionary, could conjure anything he wants. But it doesn't matter, because Yhwach has already seen it and already changed it to his favour. The only 2 abilities on this list that can realistically oppose the Almighty in really any way are Book of the End and Aizen's Kanzen Saimin, as we see in the manga itself. Now, the antithesis might be able to do it as well. It is hinted at hugely in the manga. We'll see how that plays out in the anime, but really only those 2 can do anything about the Almighty whatsoever. And of course, we get numerous examples of the Almighty doing absolutely crazy things when Ichigo finally activates his true bankai in a really awesome display of Kubo's creativity, of how clever he can be with his paneling, with his pages. The next page, Ichigo's bankai is immediately broken in half, because it was already broken in the future. And much later on, when Ichigo does successfully manage to land a fatal attack on the Quincy King and carve him in 2, it does not matter, because in the future, Yhwach had already seen his death and has altered the future to rewrite it to the point where he still survives. This is again exactly what I mean, and exactly why basically all of the abilities on this list can do nothing before it, because Yhwach can freely rewrite his own death. Think of the painstaking process involved in Szayelaporro's Gabriel, while Yhwach can basically just do that, but even better and with basically no effort whatsoever. And there's also the idea that the Almighty can do a number of other things as well, such as freely giving and taking all power, which in itself is also completely crazily broken. Now, again, earlier I said that I consider the Shrift themselves to just be the ability, because that kind of makes the most sense to me with the way they're presented in the story itself. But if we were again to separate them out, clearly the future sight and altering the future is the most broken part of this, but realistically, as a package, nothing really even comes close. There are some clever weaknesses built into this thing. Aizen's Kyokusui being able to manipulate it is cool. Tsukishima's book at the end being able to create an alternate past timeline, essentially, that then, of course, creates an alternate present that hasn't been affected by the Almighty is cool as well, but at the end of the day, this thing is on a completely different level. It is suitably godly, and the Almighty is comfortably the most broken ability in all of Bleach. It was in my last video, and I imagine it probably will be forevermore. Alright everyone, but that's it for today's video. As always, I really do hope you enjoyed it. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. Which of these 25 or so, I think it may have been 26 in the end, abilities do you think is the most broken in Bleach? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. Are any of these powers more broken than the true nature of the Almighty? I'd love to hear your thoughts on the subject. And which of these powers would you rank in, say, the top 5 or so? Do you agree with my top 3? Again, do please let me know. Alright everyone, thank you so much for watching again. I hope you got some value out of this video today. Consider hitting subscribe if you haven't done already. Consider checking out my other channel, Mr. Tomo Talks Games. And as always, I want to end by saying a massive thank you and giving a huge shout out to my wonderful supporters over on Patreon. Again, your support does mean the absolute world to me, and I really couldn't do this without you. Alright everyone, once again, thank you so very much for watching. Until next time, I'll catch you later, and I'll see you then.